Clint Ramos, the Tony-nominated costume designer of Once on This Island and a previous Tony winner. Thanks for joining us today. I'm very excited to talk to you because your work in Once on This Island is so unique. And I'm interested to hear about your process when you take on designing a show like this. Do you get inspired by like an overall theme for the piece, or does your work come from something more original, like more individual, like a color or a specific item that starts it out?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. With regards to your question, I think it varies from project to project. I think that's the hardest part, at least for me, is to trying to find a source for inspiration. So I work very hard at like trying to find that, because I need to be consumed by a project in order for me to sort of make it happen. With Once on This Island, it was very that process was very easy because Michael Arden really expressed his love for the musical when he first talked to me about it and what he wanted to do. So the design mandate was pretty clear from the beginning, and it was he really wanted to define what it was to do a revival. We could acknowledge where we are as a global community, and reposition the musical to our present society right now. So, that sort of just made it very clear to me, like what I needed to do in terms of the research of the storytellers, in terms of the costumes. And that was a great sort of starting point from there. And then I just found like little clues here and there along the way that helped me develop the whole look for the musical.
I recently talked to your fellow stage designer, Dane Lafferty.
I love him.
Sorry, are you hearing feedback on your end? I'm hearing some on mine. Sorry. I talked to Dane, and he was saying how Haiti was such a huge inspiration for this piece with their current, disaster recovery period. What elements of that did you find that you need to bring into the production?
Well, all of it. I think these disasters are happening more and more frequently in our present day world, and it's very photographed. We see what these people look like in the news. We are sort of accustomed to them, I suppose, but we really honed in on those post-disaster photographs of Haiti. Michael and Dane had gone to Haiti too, and so they brought a load of photographs with them. But the research really primarily focused on post-disaster Haiti, both hurricane and earthquake, and also post-disaster Caribbean. Puerto Rico and all the other Caribbean islands that were devastated by the hurricane just over a year ago. So a lot of the research came from there in terms of what the storytellers looked like. But then in terms of what the materials could be for the fantastical elements of the musical, that all came from looking at what the detritus is of the world, and in a way, a lot of what Dane's work contributed to eventually what I could use as materials for the costumes.
Do you find you grab ideas from other designers a lot that you're working with? Because the show has a very cohesive look overall, between the costumes and lighting and scenic. Is there any sort of part in the collaboration where you get sparked an idea from one of them?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about my collaboration with Dane and Michael is that it was really completely symbiotic. I think one of the things, because we needed to devise this world out of this very sort of narrow parameter that we had, we really looked at each other's work, and we really consulted with each other about decisions that would affect, inevitably it would just affect each other, especially with Dane and me, because he created the world, and I created the inhabitants. So, you know, he created what the world looked like, and I created what the inhabitants of that world looked like. So with this particular project, it was necessary for us to do so, and it was pleasurable because, you know, Dan and I are pals, and I get along with him famously. So, you know, it was a no-brainer to do it. With Michael, because Michael had asked me early on to do the costumes, he and I had sort of this privilege of bouncing off of ideas in terms of casting, and, you know, how we recalibrated each look as casting developed. And so that was also a great sort of privilege and pleasure to do, you know.
I'm really interested in how you came up with the materials and the look for the gods. For those who haven't seen the show, there are 4 gods, these deities on the island. And since the costumes are really kind of like found objects.
Yeah.
So what was your thought? How did you go about making those characters stand out when everything sort of has to be these found clothing?
Right. Well, I think it started with the storytellers, right? Like, who are these hurricane ravaged people, and sort of identifying who they are as characters, and what their backstory is. Why are they there? Why do we find them there? And it all started with that. And out of those storytellers, 4 will play gods in the fable, you know, because the fable exists in that sort of in the middle of it. And I think by sort of creating real characters with real stories for each particular god before their transformation into deities, it narrowed down the materials that I could use, you know. So everything that they wear is partly, some of it is what they wore as regular storytellers, and then a lot of it also is composed of the materials that's around them in their particular story, you know. So that happens like for each god. Like, just as an example, for Agwe, the god of water, played by Quentin Earl Darrington, and then by we thought he would be a fisherman, right? And the storm sort of like took away all of his boats. He's rebuilding, you know. So you see him left alone with this one boat. He's painting the boat, you know, and he's collecting these plastic bags out of the water to clean it up. And eventually all of those factor into his costume. He uses the paint to paint himself blue. He retains the swimming trunks that he wears from the top of the show. And that's based on a photographic research I saw of a fisherman in Haiti. And then he creates this sort of like beard all around him out of plastic bags, basically just like trash, you know. I was trying to say a little bit about how we're, you know, how we're actually part of costumes, you know.
I'm curious if you know, it sounds like there's a lot of input from the actors there. Were any of your concepts that you originally came up with then altered by like a, you know, backstory, something that an actor came up?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I think one of the things we did was, well, just going down the line, I talked about Agwe, Leia, Urzuli. That costume really is anchored on who Leia is, right? I think when we found out that Leia was cast as Urzuli, Michael and I really worked hard to find a place for this Asian woman, this Filipino woman in Haiti. You know, clearly she's not Black, you know. And so we went back to the research and looked at all that hurricane ravaged stuff, those photographs, and we found a lot of like Asian and Filipino nurses and doctors volunteering for Doctors Without Borders. And so that's sort of the basis for her. And then she's distributing mosquito netting. She has a stethoscope, you know, she hangs out by the fallen power lines. So all of her costume, her whole gown is made out of mosquito netting. She has the stethoscope belt. Her headdress is made out of the wires from the power, the fallen power pole. So that all factored in. I think the actor or the character that had most input was Papa Gay, and originally played by Merle Dandridge. Merle really wove this intricate story about who she was before the hurricane. You know, she was this she was this beautiful woman who had animals. You know, she had this affinity to nature, and she took care of a lot of farm animals. And when the hurricane happened, she lost everything, and also her mind. You know, so when we find her at the top of the show, she's actually homeless. You know, she's collecting Coke cans and all of this garbage. Also, you know, her costume is essentially made out of the pounded up Coke cans and the motor oil from the truck where she basically lives in an abandoned truck. She uses that to paint herself. And the horns that she puts on herself are the horns of the last goat that survived that she eventually killed. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So it's all kind of like a, there's like a lot of story behind it. And what was so great about it was that because the actors were so invested in what we were trying to do design-wise, they really owned it. You know, they contributed it. It would only have worked if the actors were really on board. You know.
Mm-hmm. Is there one specific piece that is your favorite that made it into the show?
I think the thing that gives me such delight maybe is Alex Newell's skirt. You know. Because that's actually made out of like this tablecloth, you know, that's ubiquitous in all these third world nations. It's made out of plastic. You know, Alex Newell's character as Asaka, the mother of the earth, the goddess mother of the earth, before he transforms into the deity, he's actually like a street vendor, like a street food vendor. And that's sort of the tablecloth that covers his like cooking station. I think why it gives me a lot of like delight, I guess, and happiness is because it's so familiar to me, you know what I mean? And it's also like one of these things where it's like a drag moment, you know, where you're just like, you just make everything work, like whatever's around you, you know, make plastic bags work or whatever to make yourself look fabulous. And I think that's sort of what I find really delightful about his costume, you know?
Well, I think he feels delightful about it too, the way he twirls it around during his number.
That's the other thing. It's like you really, you know, the way he twirls with it, and that's a heavy skirt. The way he twirls with it is like remarkable, and that's like a fine example of if the actor's not on board, then that costume would never have worked. 'Cause, you know, I put him in like this Atlanta Falcons jersey, you know, like trying to like make sure we sort of still telegraph the masculine, you know, but then, you know, that character would have cut the neck out and made it off the shoulder to, you know what I mean, and just like embellished it and stuff. So I think it gives me infinite like happiness when I see that costume. Yeah.
And you kind of have a Tony Awards milestone for your work because you won a Tony Award. This is your second nomination. You won for Eclipsed in the play category for costume design for play, and you were the first person of color to win that category. Is that correct?
That is true. I actually didn't know about it until a friend of mine, Liesl Tommy, pointed it out. Yeah, it's I guess it's profound. It's remarkable, and it's also maddening at the same time that, you know, we're in 2018 and that's, you know, happening. I think we have a lot of work to do. I think, you know, the year that I won, it was a great year for artists of color. I think that this year, the pendulum kind of, you know, it's like a pendulum. It just keeps on swinging back and forth. And we're hoping that swings are not as extreme. You know?
Another thing I really liked about, I think it's one of the coolest costume wins because a lot of the times in those categories that I think people default to, what's the period piece this year? You know, what's the period piece? And Eclipse was certainly the opposite of that. And it's cool to see them look outside of the norm and say, this also requires thought and art to put every type of design together. But you have worked in more traditional period pieces as well. Do you?
Yeah. I mean,
do you prefer like one style over the other, or is there a style you prefer to work in?
Oh, listen, I love everything, and I love like pretty period dresses. You know, when I did Elephant Man, that was like 1880s, and you know, we had all these bustle skirts and bustle gowns, and it was wonderful to do that. And to a certain extent, although it was a version of a period when I did a Sunday in the Park with George. You know, that's you know, it's fun because it's pretty dresses and all that stuff. I love all of it. You know, I think for me, what is always, I guess, interesting, and I yearn for, is just an idea of how I can interpret things, or with revivals reinterpret them. You know, in a sort of, in a way that we've never seen them before.
That's great. Well, I'm going to let you get back to. I know you've had a busy day, so thank you for sitting down with me, and best of luck this June at the Tony Awards.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.